Ijoma O'Neil is my name, and this is my story. It's a lifetime opportunity when you get the privilege to be the one to tell your own story. Number 18 Creek Road, Abatete Fege, Onitsha.
Oh,
That's the place I was born, and that's the beginning of my story. Mr. Ernest Obi-Joma is my father, and he got married to several women. The second woman was my mother, and her name is Lucy. I can't tell exactly what her surname is. But then Onitsha, I was born as the second child to 4 children, a boy before me, another boy after me, and then the last girl. My father had 8 children from 4 women. All the stories about my father's life I was told, because somewhere around the age of 4 and 5, the same way my elder brother was picked away from our residence in Onitsha, so also one day I was carried away. The earliest memories I can remember about my father's sisters is that they usually would visit, and every time they came with goods, a lot of gifts for all of us, and we were excited and always looking forward to receive those gifts. And every time they would seek to go back to their place of residence, I cried profusely, wanting to follow them because they represented a relief from the troubles in my home. Talking to you right now, I can still relive graphic memories of fightings, my father running around, sometimes having a cutlass in his own hand. What they fought about, I never knew, I never heard the stories. But for me, this address was where it began. And that day that I hoped for came, and this auntie of mine visited and asked that I follow her. But anyway, my father was the one who took me a few days later. And we journeyed down to Delta State. Then it was Bendel State. And this must be somewhere around 1978, 79, if my memory serves me right. And we came down to this busy place called Warri. I didn't know the name of the place at the time. Of course, I was quite very young. And then my father took me down to the riverside, and we had to hop on what you call a local boat, a ferry, sort of a local ferry, that we journeyed for hours unending, and down to this isolated settlement, an island far away into the Niger Deltas, the creeks of Niger Delta. My father left me a few days after then in the hands of his sisters, and there I grew in this local settlement. The buildings were made of zinc sheets, roof and the body. We did not have electricity. There were no good roads. There was no pipe-borne water and no health facility. How I managed to survive there, or maybe I should have said how every one of us managed to survive there, was just the hand of God. Growing up in Ogula was quite interesting. Every day was party for every one of us there. Why was that so? I grew up in the midst of revelry, partying because my guardians ran a brothel. I attended the only primary school that existed in that community. In that primary school, we all went on bare feet. If you came to my primary school at the time and you wore slippers or a sandal or shoes, the teachers would take it away from you because you were spoiling the uniformity that was expected in the school, and that was barefoot. We sat on timbers, laid on piles of concrete. Our teachers were a few of them who managed to bear the hardship of living in such rural settlement. Houses were zinc houses. The roofs and the walls were made of zinc sheets. If we had to take our bath, we would all come out and file up, waiting for each person's turn to either use the lavatory outside or to use the bathroom because it was a public. But something you couldn't take from us was the joy of that communal settlement. And my parents were respected people in that community because we were presumed to be comfortable, because our place was where everybody came every evening to drink, to dance. At the tender age of 10, 11, I was seeing naked women, prostitutes, drinking and all that. I got exposed to a large number of music, and I many times played the disc jockey, the one who was sitting behind the desk, changing the music from one album to the other to ensure that the dancing continued. And that was my primary education. On the other side, I was doing very well in school. The teachers were concerned, and so they'll come home and talk to my guardians to find a way to get me out of that village so I could get better education outside. At least when I got to secondary school, my parents listened, and I was taken away off to Kwara State, St. Augustine's College, Kaba, then Kwara, but now it's called Kogi State. And there I became a boarder in a Catholic missionary school. Now in the hostel where I was, knowing I couldn't speak English language, and I had very interesting stories to tell from my upbringing at home, I put myself in the spotlight and did everything I could to force myself into communicating. That's how I got good at it. That's how I made lots and lots of friends. I began to experiment with social life. Myself and a few friends would scale the wall and go to attend parties off camp. Sometimes those parties ended up in fights. At home, I had learned to be going around with these prostitutes, sleeping with prostitutes, learning to party. I just loved the careless life. Not only did I continue to drink, I started smoking, and I smoked hemp. And with everything I got involved in, I did them excessively. I was not cajoled to join the cult. It was a badge of social relevance, and I would not be left behind. And so I looked for a group and joined them. And I did everything I was old and bad enough to do. And it began to take a toll on me. My reputation was going down. My guardians were concerned about me. Things were going wrong. Now I was recognized both in school and in the little community where I grew up in as a dangerous influence. And so after that education, I sat down and I thought that it was time for me to reorganize myself and reintroduce myself into the society. So I stopped drinking. I stopped going around with those prostitutes. I stopped smoking by sheer application of my will. And then the only proper model I had in my head of something I wanted to be or do was something that made an impression in me in 1983 when I had the privilege to visit an uncle who was a medical doctor. I came back wanting to talk like him and to be like him. Deep in my heart, I wanted to live a life that was different from my father's life. I hardly saw my father, barely about 4 or 5 times before he passed on in 1989. It is my father's death that made me to realize that my own mom had died a year before. Just to tell you how far removed we were from our parents. We grew in that village in isolation, cut away from our parents, and I began to gain my own following. But somewhere in 1998, leading up to 1999, there were years of reflection for me, and I began to retrace my step. And something happened at the tail end of 1999, which led me to reprioritize my life and acknowledge the call to ministry. Oris was the name of a little girl that I found very attractive while I was on campus. But then she invited myself and a friend to this fellowship, and it was a laughable thing for me at the time. I wasn't interested in anything religious. But for Ori's sake, I decided to give it a try. And so one evening, myself and a friend of mine went to this gathering of believers called Believers Love World Fellowship there on campus. Now, this coincided with a period where I was already having serious troubles with the cult that I was already a part of on campus. But as I got into that meeting and I listened to the pastor speak, I felt like this is the kind of person that I want to be in my life. The pastor's name was Ima Esuelimen, if I got the name correctly. And so I decided to give it a try. I continued, myself and my friend continued to attend that fellowship. In the process of time, we were led to Christ, and then we were baptized. And that was my beginning with the church, BLW Fellowship Now, on campus in Auchi. And there the big break was when this fellowship invited the founder of the entire ministry, Christ Embassy, at the time. This was somewhere around 1998, I believe. And Pastor Chris came for that meeting. He was wearing a flowing gown, agbada, and he preached. I cannot remember what he taught that night, but my eyes were transfixed on him. I was looking at him, and I could see exactly what my life was about. Everything I thought about my future until then came together for me. I saw my life in his life. And from then on, I made a commitment that this was the life that I was going to live. And when I got back home, I took my relationship with God seriously, and that began for me the journey of growth in ministry. Born again and very passionate about the gospel, I began to source materials. It was clear to me where this seed was sown was Christ Embassy. And so I went back to that ministry, followed through all the training procedures in that ministry. But I had a vision. One night I got a vision from God that made it clear to me that I was supposed to grow in ministry and preach the gospel. And so I abandoned every other plan that I had until then. It was not easy for people around me to accept that, but eventually they did, because I was not in the position to listen to anybody. It was a very radical transformation for me, and eventually it affected everybody who was connected to me. All of my friends eventually got saved. I grew up in Christ Embassy for the next 10 years, learned everything I needed to learn, and then At the end of that 10 years, I decided to go out, and with the blessing of the leadership of the ministry, I started out on my own. Somewhere in 2004, I'd gone to preach somewhere, and there I met this young lady who also was invited to preach there. It happened to be her father's church. And so I saw in her someone whose heart and desire and passion was for ministry also.
It was 2004, August, the last week of August, we had a youth convention at my dad's church, and I was scheduled to speak, to teach during the program. And Pastor Neil was a guest speaker. My sister, my elder sister, had invited him to speak, and so we met. That's where we met.
We became friends after that. Then, 1 year later, I told her my intention and the call of God upon my life. She happened to be perhaps the only person in all of my life that understood the things that I felt were too difficult to explain to people. And that was because she also had committed her life to the path of ministry.
From the first time, from that first meeting, especially after I heard him preach, he was the exact kind of man that I really wanted. But it took maybe one more year for our relationship to grow to that point where he decided that he wanted us to court with the goal for marriage. So I can't say there was a proposal really, but I think it was more like formality, because I already knew from the beginning that this person was the person for me.
And this lady and two of her brothers that I met there at that meeting became very committed to ministry. She became my fiancée. I knew her for about 4 years before we got married in 2009.
So we started out writing, and the first email he wrote to me said, "Why are you standing in my way?" And I responded by saying, "You are the one standing in my way." So just sort of acknowledging the fact that our paths had crossed just in the line of duty, so to speak. And so writing letters, and then to talking on the phone, because I was in school, he was in school, and then whenever he was in town, he was either at NNPC at the balcony talking, or we're walking down the winding path around the estate, talking from church to his place at Delta Palace Road, church at Airport Road, right? Talking. So we were talking an awful lot about our different perspectives, the 5 priorities of life, what he wanted to do in the future. So it was intense conversations, really. That was what we did. I think we covered the basics back to back, I can't think of anything that we didn't talk about during that period of courtship.
And after that marriage, she knew exactly what we were marrying for. It was for the rest of our lives, to build a family, to build a ministry, to impact the world around us, to preach this gospel with everything that we had. And so in 2009, the ministry began as a fellowship, first in my living room.
Yes, so it was a unique journey for me, because we got married in 2009 May, and I got pregnant immediately, meaning that we started, got into the family, we got married, and then 7 months later we started the ministry. So we had a new married, a new baby, started out in ministry. I think, like I always say, I don't know what to compare it to, because I don't have any other experience, but I can say it was It was an adventure of faith. It was intense.
We began as a church in 2011 and eventually moved in 2013 to our current location on Jakwa Road 230. And the church blossomed from there to what we now have as the Bridge Church. Somewhere at the beginning of this year, I took a trip back to the village of my upbringing, Ogula Town. I went with the camera crew because I wanted this as an opportunity to look back at my life. And so we took a trip that we called the Homecoming. It was both fun for all of us, a time to bond for all of us, but also an important opportunity that we had to look back at the footprints of my past.
So as you can see behind me, you see this kind of boat. This was the only means of transportation in 1977, and that's the community. So I'll be telling you other bits of the story, how it developed from here.
Look at this. This very building was a dance hall. All those buildings were chalets for ladies to sleep and all the other things happened. I can really remember crossing this several times. So this is what remains of the very popular brothel. My room has a door here. So this was my room. They didn't have this attachment at the time. If you look at this place, you have the dance hall here. So you have these buildings are chalets. Bedroom here. That's where. So this is where I grew up. And, I don't want to go into that place, but there's several rooms. Of course, you can see on that room 13.
Yes.
That's the way they were marked. I had room 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You can see room 17. All you could have then, if you got into, was just a bed space for sex workers.
You don't say when we say we did this community. When we did this community, like this place, they like this. So when are they up? When are small? Are they up? They come this place. That time I saw it just be, but time to come. These are still remain the same like this. Everywhere scatter. This place don't old. I know them. I know Shukuma. I know him picking when they call Shukuma. When they study Ogula before marriage or woman.
I'm going to the first Christ Embassy Church that I pastored as what you call a satellite church coordinator. So this was the first Christ Embassy Church that I pastored, the first church ever that I pastored, so I shouldn't say the first Christ Embassy. God saved me Christ Embassy, but when I came to the village, there was no Christ Embassy Church, so I attended the Church of God mission here, and I will show you the church. There I led the choir, but this was the first church I pastored, and this was the place we used. I'm sure they don't meet here anymore, they may be meeting somewhere else, but you can see that's the pulpit. This is the size of the building, and we were here for a while before I went back for my school, because I did an OND. I went back for HND. Once I woke up in the morning from my house, this is the place I came to. So everybody here who's a man is my brother, everybody who's a woman here is my sister, everybody who's a mother is my mother here. So this is the Iyela family. They will always be a part of my life. This is where they buried the father when he passed. So you can look at it. So everyone knows me here. So let me go and show you the church. When I got saved in 1997, when I got back here, there was no Christ Embassy Church, so I fellowship to the Church of God Mission. I rose to be their music director. So this door opens every Sunday, Monday, Friday. I was almost every day in church here until I left this place. It wasn't this beautiful at the time. I can call it beautiful now compared to what it used to be. It was always this place. They had two small doors by the side, but this was always the entrance. So now let me show you the final place, my primary school, very novel spot. This is the school. Here used to be the field. Somewhere in 1977 or 76, I'm not so sure. All these roads you see here were not there. We walked on sand and we sat on timbers stacked up on concrete.
Every man's story is supposed to be an inspiration, a deposit for the next generation coming. I wanted my children to be able to see that in spite of the odds that were stacked up against me as a child, I was able to navigate through it.
Oh, Jaguda! Oh, boy! So, Bob! Hey! You changed! Oh, Bob! God like you! Oh, Jaguda! Sorry, Mara! Oh, Bob! The class! What's he for telling you? Shock! Sorry! Oh, Bob! Talk close to God. Talk close to God. Sorry, Mara! Sorry, Mara!
As a coach,
Ah!
God will do it for me. God will do it for me.
Amen.
I met Pastor Neil in 2004. I think it was around September or August, September, there about 2004. In a church that happened to be my dad's church. In the time, even though I didn't go to church all through the year, if they had a program in church, I would have to come to church. So it was in one of those occasions in 2004 that we were told that Pastor Chris of Christ Embassy was coming to this church. And in my mind, I said, Pastor Chris, to this place, well, let's just keep our fingers crossed and see how it goes. The D-Day came, and a young man walked into the church, really looking like Pastor Chris in a sense, but it's just that we found out that the reason why they said it was Pastor Chris was because he was coming from Christ Embassy. It was the first time somebody was teaching in that church and people were asking for extra sheet of paper like in exam hall because people had a lot to write. By the time the event was over, the meeting was over, the next Sunday I was in Christ Embassy because I felt like, and he mentioned then that he was just about 5 or 6 years born again and in this church. And I felt like, man, if that is true, I wanted to be where he was coming from because I felt like what he was sharing and teaching was coming from where he was coming from. So looking back now, I feel like it was the hand of God that orchestrated my path. You know, how I was born out of wedlock. Right now as I sit here, if not for the interruption that happened along this road and meeting Pastor O'Neill, I could have been, for example, a native doctor by now because at one point in my life I was an assistant native doctor. I feel like Pastor or God being omniscient, knowing everything, knowing the beginning from the end and knowing the end from the beginning, saw the season that I am in now and the things that were capable or possible and sent Pastor O'Neill ahead of time to shaping and mold me in the path that I am in.
Two major factors that are major lessons for me. The first is the power of choice, the ability that everyone has, in spite of their circumstances, to make decisions that will choose or that will determine how their story turns out. Like I said at the beginning, every man's life is a story. None of us choose the place where we are born. Many times we couldn't choose how we were moved to certain places, like it was for me when my father took me to that village. I couldn't refuse it because I was a child. But in spite of the environment and how it took a toll on me as I grew up, there were critical points where I had to make decisions that changed the outcome of my life. And so decision is the first and critical factor in how your life turns out. But the second part is that the grace of God. It was the grace of God that kept me. Looking back also, I can see instances that would have taken me out. One particular instance, I'm not even talking about the indulgences with drug and alcohol and all of that. But there was a near-death experience I had one time. And I didn't include that in this story. But when I woke up from that experience, a friend was with me. I held his hand and I prayed. That was the first time I prayed. And I decided that I was going to serve God with all of my life. When I was still in the cult, I saw a young boy beaten down until he died. The boy was screaming, was calling a particular boy's name who knew him. But the people who were beating this boy up, they were under instruction from the superiors in the cult to just discipline him. But this was one discipline going too far. That could have been me. That could have been the end of that story of my life. But here I am. There was another particular instance where I had forged signature of the terminal head to put people on helicopter to fly out of that location out. That case of forgery took me to the court. I could have been sent to prison. That would have changed the story. We will not be talking about this right now. We don't know the incidents in your life that could have turned a path and maybe not bring you back on track. But the grace of God kept me. And I believe that that grace is available. So, looking forward from here, the big question in my mind is, what do I want my legacy to become in this life? What do I intend to leave behind? I've asked myself this question, and here is my answer. I have lived a life of purpose. Purpose has been the significant pursuit of my life. To live my life in line with God's will, in line with His gifts in my life, and to be of good investment and to be of benefit to the society at large. And that's been my passion, and that's my calling. That's the reason for the church and the ministry that God has put in my hand. That's the reason for my family. What do I want my legacy to be? I've lived a purposeful life and I'm still living it as a person. That is happening as in my marriage between myself and my wife. But I want that to translate into institutional purpose. To leave an institution, the church, my family, and the business that I get involved in, such that people don't just work in the church, or people don't serve in the church, or live in my family after I'm gone, or in my business, without them leading their lives with purpose. And so the very core of my message is the 5 priorities of life. I teach people that life is just about 5 things. The most important thing in this life are just 5 things. Number 1 is your faith. That is your spiritual life. Number 2 is your work. The gift that God has given to you, you must work to serve it. That's your mental life. Number 3 is your relationship, meaningful relationship. That's your emotional life. Number 4 is your physical health. And then number 5 is your wealth, which is your investments or your finances. And it's my deepest desire that those who are saved and those who are unsaved will come not only to God, but will come to the realization of their specific purpose and to live it out and then to pass it on through the institutions that we leave behind, whether that is our families, our ministries, and our business. Thank you for listening to this. God bless you.